Okay, hi everyone. My name is Ian Middleton. I'm a travel and landscape photographer, and welcome to one of my video tutorials. Now, in this video, I am going to show you a fantastic tool that's available in both Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw when used as a plugin with Adobe Photoshop. The tool is called the Graduated Filter Tool. You can see it up here in this top row of tools here. So here it is, Graduated Filter Tool. Now, if you're not familiar with what a graduated filter is, quite simply a real graduated filter is a glass or resin filter, usually rectangular in shape, which goes over the front of your lens. And the idea is the top half of the filter is darkened. And the idea is that when you have a scene like this, where you have a very, very bright sky and a not so bright foreground, so basically the balance between the brightness in the foreground and the brightness in the sky is too much for the camera to handle. Now when we look at it, we would see much more detail down here and much more detail in the sky, but the camera cannot. Its dynamic range is much lower than our eyes. So traditionally, this graduated filter was put on the front of the lens, and it still is today. I still use graduated filters myself. But now Adobe have developed this graduated filter tool which emulates the graduated filter, but it gives us a whole extra host of features and things that we can adjust. So while a graduated filter on our lens will darken down the top of our image and help us expose for the sky correctly and the foreground correctly, that's pretty much it, exposure. Whereas the graduated filter tool in Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom can do so much more. So I'm going to show you what it can do. Now I'm using Adobe Camera Raw as a plugin to Photoshop here, but as I said, if you're a Lightroom user, you have the same tools within Lightroom, so you can do exactly the same as what I'm doing here, except you'll just do it in Lightroom, that's all. Okay, so as I said, typically we'll use a graduated filter to balance the brightness between the foreground and the sky. So here in this photo is a classic example of when you can have these kinds of problems. This photo was shot at sunrise, and of course the sun is coming up behind the mountains here, so the sky is extremely bright, and because the sun is behind and the image is backlit, so this foreground of this church here is all backlit, that means that this foreground is much darker. So if I expose for the sky, then my foreground is too dark, but if I expose for my foreground, then my sky is too bright and overexposed. But if I expose to try to get a happy medium between the two, it still doesn't look right. So what I did here was I bracketed my exposure and I took 3 shots. Now when using graduated filter tool, it's very important that you haven't overexposed the sky to the point where you've burned out all the detail. And it's not retrievable. In this case, I haven't done that. So the first thing to do obviously is select the tool, and then you can see this cross here. This cross is where your graduation will start. Now typically graduated filters that you put on your lens have a variation in the graduation. So the top half is dark, the bottom half is clear. But the transition from dark to clear is either very hard or very soft, traditionally. And of course the filters come in varying strengths. You can have a 1, 2, 3 or even a 4-stop neutral density graduated filter. So that basically means that the top half here in its full strength would be 4 stops or 2 stops difference, and then the graduation from 4 stops to 0 would be either hard if you buy a hard grad or soft if you buy a soft grad, You can also now buy medium grads and also very hard grads. So quite simply, the difference would be if you have a scene like this, where between the mountains and the sky there is a bit of detail here, and if you have a very hard graduation between the two, like this, it's quite obvious. It looks horrible. But if you've got a scene where there's like this, for example, where the horizon is flat, then as we can see here, the graduation is not so obvious. Okay, so that's why in the field you would choose, for a scene like this, a hard grad, and for a scene like this, a softer graduation between the two, so it's not so obvious. Let's get rid of these. The beauty of this graduated filter tool, with the filters that you put on your lens, either whether it's a soft or a hard grad is fixed. There's, basically you can move it about to position it in your frame, but the graduation itself is fixed. Whereas with this tool, we can choose as hard or as soft as we want. So that's one great feature about this tool. So to use this tool, what you do is you take this cross here and you position it where you want the graduation to start. Okay, and if you hold down, you'll see, first of all, if you put it like this, it moves very easily. So what you can do, if you hold down the shift key and click, then it will keep it straight. Now the green is where the graduation starts and the red is where the graduation ends. So pull this down where you want the graduation to start and end, and also how much graduation you want. Now you can also come here and pull this down if you want it to start further down. Here we go. And once you've done that, over here on the right you have all of the tools that you can use. Okay. Now, as I said, typically we use it for exposure. So in this case, if I want to pull down, if I wanted a two-stop filter on there, two-stop ND grad, then I can pull my exposure down to -2. So as you can see, it's affected everything above the green, and then everything between the green and the red is affected on a gradual basis, and everything underneath the red is unaffected. Okay, so again, once we've done that, I can pull this up or down to adjust it to the right, just to the right amount that I want. I can even I can move this down if I want it to start in a different position, so I can just play around with it like this. I can darken it more if I want to, I can brighten it more if I want to, I can do anything I want. So let's set that to about 0.2. I can also use other tools down here, not just the exposure. So another thing I could also do is pull my highlights tool down to bring more of the detail back into the highlight areas. I can also, if I want, boost my saturation up there. I don't want to do that, but I can if I want to. I can adjust the shadow areas within my scene. I can pull up the whites or darken the whites. I can darken the blacks, brighten the blacks. I can adjust the texture. I can use the clarity tool. I can use the dehaze tool. Saturation, as you've just seen. Sharpness, noise reduction, moire reduction, defringe. All of these tools that you're probably familiar with when using your Adobe Camera Raw for editing your picture as a whole, all of these tools are available here. But in this case, rather than applying the effect to the whole image, you're only applying it to the area where you've set your graduation. So, as I said, the whole of the effect is applied above the green line, and then between the green and the red line it's applied on a gradual basis, and we can choose how hard or how soft we want that to be. One other feature, very quickly, we can use is this range mask, and what we can do here is select the luminance, and then we can actually select the luminance range, so we can actually apply this effect not only to this area but also to either the bright parts or the dark parts. So we can choose to mask off actually the darker parts and only affect the brighter parts. Now, a good way to see how this works is, again, in this case you hold down the Alt key. Now you can see here that when it's on 0, the white part is showing you that your change is going to affect everything. But as we pull it over, we can actually mask off some areas. So now we can see that the effect we apply will only be applied to some of the brighter areas. See? So this is quite useful. You can see the difference here. You see, when we pull the luminous mask right back, the effects that I've applied up here are affecting everything. But if I pull this luminous mask over, then it's affecting just the brighter parts, not so much the darker parts. Okay. You can also do the same with colors. You can select colors and, you know, mask off certain colors and just only have the effect applied to certain colors in your image. So just effectively gives you much more control. So there you have it. If you don't like what you've done, you can always clear it and start again. You can actually apply multiple graduated tools as well, not just one. So I could actually do another one here at the bottom. Let's say, let's 0 these for now, and let's say in this case, for argument's sake, I wanted to brighten the exposure in the foreground. I can do the opposite. I can bring that out. I could brighten the shadows, lift the shadows just in that area down there. Okay. So there's actually no limit. I can apply multiple graduated filters to an image. But if I want to get rid of one, then basically select the one you want to get rid of and hit the backspace to delete it. Very simple. So, as an example of the flexibility of this tool and the things that you can do with it, I've chosen a number of photos here so I can show you some different examples. Okay. Now, as we saw on this one, in this case the horizon is very flat. So the transition between the bright sky and the darker foreground is very hard. So in this case, I can simply use a hard grad. There we go. Oh, that's too dark, so if I just wanted to pull it down about this much, if we clear the tool away, you can clearly see the difference. So for this kind of scene, the hard grad is ideal. Again, I can adjust the highlights, tweak up the saturation a touch perhaps, add a bit of colour into that sky. I can even use the temperature tool up here, which will adjust my white balance, but again only in the area I've selected. So I can warm up my sky if I want. Okay. Now for a scene like this, a misty scene, there is no hard transition between the bright parts and the darker parts. It's actually very soft. So in the scene I would use a soft grad on my lens. So in this case, again, I'm going to zero these, best to zero these. One thing always good to remember after you've used this tool, make sure when you use a new tool or you try to apply a new grad that you zero everything again. Okay, so in this case I'm going to apply a very soft graduation. Now with a real ND grad I would never get one with such a soft transition between the two. So this is really, really good. And again, there we go. I can take this down as much as I want. Take it down to maybe 1.5. Clear that. Let's look at before and after. So in this case, I could use a really soft grad. Now in this scene here, there was a really great sky, and believe it or not, there was some lovely pink colours in those clouds, but it was also a bit hazy. So by exposing it correctly, I've got a bit of a washed out sky when opened in the raw file. So again, I'll use my grad tool here, zero that. The exposure is fine. I don't need to do anything with the exposure. There's nothing wrong there. But what I can do in this case is use my dehaze tool to cut through that haze and bring back some of that colour. Maybe even use my highlights tool a touch, and even maybe the saturation tool a little bit to bring back the colour that was there when I shot this photo. There we go. So in this case I didn't need to use any exposure adjustment because the exposure in the sky was fine, but the haze was dampening the colour. In this photo, now everything's perfect with the sky and everything's perfect here, and this is really nice, but I would like to warm up this foreground area here. Now if I had shot it with a cloudy or shady white balance, this would have warmed up the foreground nicely, but it would warm up the whole scene, making the green grass here a bit dirty brown looking, and even the sky also. So in this case, again, it's better, rather than to do the whole thing, to just use my grad tool here and use the temperature slider to warm up just that foreground area. Again, before and after. That's all that's needed there. In this scene, I actually used a 4-stop grad to photograph this, and everything is fine. The sky here is fine, but still this area where the sun came up is a little bit bright. So I could use the grad filter, and rather than using it down like this, I could use it down like this. Let's zero that temperature slider for now, and the dehaze tool. So there we go. I could slide down my highlights tool to bring that back, but see how it's affecting everything above and around. So if I clear that, instead of actually coming down this way, I could actually just apply the grad filter to this area here, bring it down from the side, and then pull back the highlights here. Now, okay, I can move this around here to try to make it look as natural as possible, so you can't see the transition between the two. There we go. Now I think that looks much better, personally. There we go. Now again, I can still, as I said, apply another tool here. Take the highlights back. Again, I could use my temperature tool to warm up the whole of the sky. So I've used two tools here, as I said. I don't need to just apply one. I can apply as many graduations as I want to. And again, in this scene, if you've ever photographed with a polarizing filter on a wide angle, then you'll be familiar with this. What often happens is that it darkens one portion of the sky, and one portion of the sky is very bright, so you've got an imbalance there. So again, I can use my graduation tool, zero all of these, and do like I did with the sun. Pull it over here and darken this area of the sky to balance up the brightness across the sky. There we go. Now that looks a lot better. Okay. So there you have it. The graduated filter tool in Adobe Camera Raw. And as I said, you can use this same tool in Lightroom. It's a fantastic tool, and I use it all the time. Hope this has been helpful. Thanks very much for watching, and please like and subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and tap that notifications bell to make sure that you get notified of my future videos, and catch you later.